So we're here with Alison Tarter, who specializes in freshwater mussels, and I'll let her tell you all about who she works for and all of that good stuff. Hi, Allison. How are you?
I'm great. How are y'all doing?
We're
Pretty good.
good. Welcome to our
Good, good.
podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good. So
Yeah.
tell everybody what you do and who you work for and all that good stuff.
Okay. I am a research associate with the Southern Regional Climate Center at Texas A&M University, which is part of atmospheric sciences. And my background is in climate related impacts on freshwater mussel communities. So, and not just mussels, but aquatic ecology, basically. How is climate change impacting our aquatic organisms?
Okay.
So, um, kind of, I guess, the regional focus is near estuaries and bays. So, but I mean, everywhere from headwaters into an estuary is where I've focused my research on that and how climate change is wreaking havoc on
Wow.
everything in between. So it's a
Thanks.
lot.
Yeah. You won't be out of a job anytime soon, I guess.
Hopefully not. I mean, hopefully it would be nice if I were,
Well,
but
yeah.
no, I don't think
It
so.
would be nice, right?
So yeah,
Okay, so you are I guess your official title is a research associate, right?
yes.
What Tell us what you do as a research associate.
I work on various research projects, including climate impacts on mussels, but also climate models. So I don't, looking into the future at different scenarios of CO2 emissions. And so there's different pathways. So the higher concentration, the warmer things are going to get, and how is that going to impact particularly the South, the southern region, because that's what we study in Texas again. So we just did a big project on how is climate change going to impact Texas bays and estuaries, and that's part of a larger project that's in review. But it's just as a research associate, you work on a little bit of everything. It's pretty interesting. So whatever is on topic that needs to be done quickly, like, okay, here you go. And then you have your own research projects that you work on as well.
Well, that's neat. It does sound really interesting because you get to work on so many different things, and I know, like, Andrew Lowry, he's off camera right now, but he's our editor,
Uh-huh.
and his title is research associate too, and his main job is helping us with the podcast here. So
Oh,
lots of
yeah.
lots of cool things I think that a research associate could do.
Right. Well, another thing that I do as a research associate is we're also part of the Texas State Climatologist Office, which is here at A&M. It's Dr. John Nielsen Gammon, and work directly with him. And I do the drought monitor call for Texas each week. So when you see the map of the US and different shades mean different drought intensities, that's another thing that I do. So
You do
I
that
do the
map?
I do the Texas part. I send in my map recommendations coordinated with other regions, with local NOAA offices and National Weather Service offices in the state, and all kinds of different people that in environmental, but mostly agricultural and municipal, and do the map, send it in, and then it gets put into the larger US map. So a
That's
little bit of
interesting.
everything.
I've looked at that map several times, and
Yes.
so yeah,
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
a lot. I use that a lot as I'm a fire ecologist, and a lot of times,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
the
Yeah.
like we could burn, but it's really too dry to
Too
burn.
dry.
We don't want
Yeah.
to, and so yeah, we'll use that a lot. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And that's one of the considerations too, is, it could be normal seasonal dryness, but yeah, if you have high winds coming in, that's obviously going to impact it more for fire,
Yeah,
especially. So we work with a lot with the fire safety, and of course A&M has its own you know, branch there for that.
right.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's neat.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is really cool. It sounds like you're across a few really dynamic projects, but that most of your focus is on mussels, but maybe we'll hear about some of your future research. But could you
Yes.
tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about the freshwater mussel research you do in relation to flood events and maybe recent flood events, and how exactly you started in that? And maybe could you also touch on, I I'm new to Texas, and
Uh-huh.
I just saw a map of Texas and all of the waterways, and you're talking about a lot of waterways going into the bays, and maybe could you just touch on, like, the different systems that you've worked across? Because 'Cause it's gotta be a lot.
Sure, it is a lot. It is a
I
lot, and
imagine.
they're all impacted differently. You have different considerations for each one. Again, so where are y'all? Are you in
In
Austin?
We're in
Kingsville,
Kingsville.
just south
Oh,
of Orphan,
Kingsville. Oh,
Southwest.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So Kingsville, from the estuaries that I work in, are mostly Sabine Lake, which is the Texas-Louisiana border. It's called a lake, but it's really an estuary. It's where the mouth of the Sabine and the Neches River come in. So the salinity is a lot less as you start going down the coast. Your salinity increases. Usually, you have higher temperatures for longer growing season, and such. And really, the upper part of the coast, there's a lot more sediment that comes in too. So the water's not as nice and clear as it is when you get down there. You usually can't see your feet in knee deep water, which isn't always how it was historically, but it's a
Really?
heavy industrial area. So you have some big rivers coming in that where we get our drinking water from, where do we put our wastewater back? So by the time you get to the bottom of a river chain, there's a lot of suspended sediments going on in your water column, which is the thing that our freshwater mussel friends do, is filter. So one mussel can filter, I want to say it's like somewhere around half a liter a day of water, which is quite a bit when you think of the density. So something around the size of a golf ball, you can put maybe 100 of them in a cubic meter and
Wow.
multiply that by all of that, and you start getting a pretty noticeable amount of filtration coming out of your water column. So they're filtering out from the water column and depositing it into the stream bed. So removing that suspended sediment, which helps with, again, with everything from just, hey, it looks better, to municipal water intakes, that reducing the amount of sediment that has to be taken out at the user end. So they kind of do a little bit of everything for everyone. Yeah.
Right. And so do flood waters push those little guys out of place, or do
They
they?
they do. They
Okay.
do. So my my project started out as I was going to look back at the flood that happened. I want to say it was like the 2013-2014 flood that happened in the region. I can't come up with the name of the storm at the moment, and compare that to changes from the drought, the 2011-2012 drought. So there was only one historic good record survey in that. It's called the Big Thicket region of Texas. It's a lot of ecosystems kind of come together there. So it's a high biodiversity area. And for Texas, it's the highest diversity of freshwater mussels, as it is for a lot of things too. But so I was going to look at how this flood, that at the time was pretty significant, impacted them, and then compare it to some post drought data. And as I was getting out there, I set up a couple of sites, and about 2 weeks later, Hurricane Harvey came.
Oh, no.
So,
Oh, no. I
so
was
that
I was
washed
like, she's
out.
not talking about Hurricane Harvey, is she?
Oh yeah,
But
yeah,
no, you're
that.
talking about something else. And then Harvey.
And then Harvey,
Wow.
right? Yeah, there was one before Harvey. I didn't say Imelda, or that's probably
Okay.
wrong, but yeah, and then there was Harvey. No, Imelda came after Harvey, I believe. So anyway, so I'd already set up and gotten some kind of good baseline numbers at some of the historic sites. And the good thing, that the end product of it, the Big Thicket protects, I don't know how many thousands of acres of riparian. It's basically a riparian buffer along the Neches River. It's also in the national park system. So there's a lot of protection. It's not like you think of a traditional national park. There are chunks that are private. There could be housing industry, there's forestry going on, but as properties come up, the trust tries to buy them and put them back in to protect the Neches River. So looking at these sites, and the ones that had good, solid protected, they were within the preserve, well intact floodplains, kind of unbelievable how little those mussels moved.
Hmm.
So it depended on the slope too. Some of it was just, even though it could be, you know, you have 20 miles of buffer on each side, if the slope of the channel was high, obviously they did not do well. But getting lower out into the main part of the Neches, you have all these backwaters that are really healthy habitats and well-connected floodplains, and the shrubbery within the floodplain slowed the overland travel of water down enough to where some of them didn't move at all.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
pretty, unfortunately, I hadn't tagged anything yet, but just by looking at the size of the individuals that were there, you could tell that they weren't, some of them had been deposited by looking at the shells. There were banged up ones, missing huge chunks, some that didn't make it. And I'm going to say too, I didn't get back into the water until it was declared safe, because there's a lot of petrochemical industry down there, so unknown factors. So I waited until that. So, but yes, so which is the same thing it would do for having intact floodplains, is just as important for neighborhoods. So if your neighborhood is right on the river and water is coming down that river and water is coming up, your house is going to flood. If you're set back and you have a good riparian buffer, there's time for that to diminish, and for the natural processes to keep that water out of your home. So same thing for aquatic organisms.
And during the dry times, how do those floodplains help? Do they help the mussels hold up when it's in drought time? Because it sounded like you had a flood season and then a drought season, or maybe vice versa.
The flood was the older event, and it actually, there was a lot more loss from the, I'm sorry, the drought was the older event, and it was more detrimental to the mussels population, because, you know, when water is going down, fish and other more able-bodied organisms can swim away into deeper water, but mussels can travel, just not very quickly. So that really was the most detrimental. But again, it was the like intact, healthy backwater systems that have kind of water seeping up into a pool, or into even a section of a river, that would, you have upstream that goes dry, downstream that goes dry, and you have one seep coming into one little bitty pool left in that river. And it left enough halfway decent water for the populations to continue and repop and spread. But again, that was when you take away water from something that can't move yet, you're going to have
some issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so you talked just a little bit about the importance of mussels and filtering, and how they can filter 1 liter of water a day, which is pretty incredible for a tiny organism. Or
it's
something.
half a liter per hour.
Half a liter per hour. Oh, that's even
six
I
liters a
way
day.
underestimated.
I think I might have said it incorrectly
No,
at first, but
I misheard it. So half a liter an hour. That's incredible.
Yes, yeah. And then the density, like in places like that, would be 80 to 100 in a square meter. So that's
a lot. And
that's a lot.
Is there any other like functional things that our listeners should know about the importance of mussels, besides the fact that they're really effective at cleaning up the water, which is awesome?
Another thing, the way I actually got into mussels, initially I was studying ichthyology. I've just always been fascinated with fish in every form. And then I learned about the freshwater mussel life cycle. So it's and the intricacy of the link. Are y'all aware of any of the background on that?
No, tell us.
Okay, so freshwater mussels, like the ones that we have here, are in they're unioid mussels is kind of their designation. So when the female, they actually have internal fertilization, which is crazy for a sessile organism, but they're filter feeders, so they have to be within a kind of decent proximity to have positive recruitment events. So the female has internal fertilization and she broods her young, and they're called glochidia, and they're basically just tiny little microscopic mussels. And then this other crazy evolutionary adaptation develops somewhere. This is not my expertise, but the female takes part of her brood pouch, and it kind of looks like, say, a minnow or a worm or something, and it's her babies with a little bit of her own mantle flesh and displays that in the water column to entice a fish over. And as the fish strikes at it, she releases all of her little baby mussels into that fish's gills, and
Oh,
they
wow.
clamp on. And so they're actually parasites in their juvenile, in their,
What?
yeah, up to a certain size, and then they drop off. It's also how they get dispersion. So since they
Right?
can't recolonate upstream after a drought, how do you get a mussel population to rebuild? How do you get bounce back?
You
So
hitch a
yeah,
ride.
yeah, you hitch a ride on a
I had
fish,
no
or I think there are even
idea.
some salamanders that they use. And there's a lot of crazy research going on in that realm, setting up laboratory experiments and just catching different kinds of minnows and seeing what's attached to them at the correct time of year for the species to be out. And with DNA, you're able to see what species it is, even if it's microscopic. So it's all kinds of
That's cool.
craziness. Yeah, so that's what got me from fish to mussels. So
That's
Interesting.
insane. And so that I mean that's my mind is blown over here. And Andrew and I are looking at each other like, what?
and some of it is so linked to one species of fish. If you were to
Okay.
remove that species of minnow, a lot of them are minnows, and there are a lot, I don't know, 20 something minnow species in that region. If you lose this one minnow, the little babies can't always make it full term if you want to use that on a different species of fish. Some
So
of
you
them are
would
more
also
generalist, some of them are very specialized. So
so you would
yeah,
also lose that mussel species then in that area?
potentially that's, yes,
Wow.
yeah. That's why there's a lot of research right now being done on host fish, and they call it like infection strategy too.
Wow. Infection. That's they have to infect the fish to
Infect
reproduce.
the fish.
So cool.
So
So and it doesn't harm the fish any or hinder their breathing at all or anything?
not really. That's again, this is not my specialty of I've not done any
Yeah.
lab studies, but it really wouldn't be beneficial for the mussel to harm the fish. So
That's a good point. Yeah.
yeah, they're kind of feeding off of it. I don't think it is not helping the fish in any way, but it's, yeah. Sometimes they get like, the fish will insist a little mussel in, and then so it's, yeah, but I don't think it's to the point that it would kill the fish, because then what would, but I don't know.
Right. No benefit from that. That's
Right.
so interesting. I had no idea that was how they reproduced. All right. Um, now, well, just one more thing. Do all mussels reproduce that way, or just these unioid that you said, or what?
Yes, yeah, just the unioid mussels.
Okay.
So we have mussels that are more like saltwater mussels, and that's
Okay.
planktonic and different. So there's like the dark phos mussel, and like mussels that you would eat in a restaurant are not the same
Okay.
thing. So yeah.
I did not know that. This whole time I was thinking about like mussels that I would find in my soup. So
Right,
we're talking
yeah.
about something different.
Different. Yeah, you wouldn't want to eat these mussels.
You
That's a
know?
question that comes up all the time. Do you eat them? It's like, okay, no, we don't really know. They can live like 100 years. So you think of something that's been around that long, filtered feeding in Texas waters in a
The
petrochemical
whole
industry
industrial
area.
revolution. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yikes.
I'm not gonna eat that.
No,
No.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
We'll just leave
yeah,
that alone. Okay.
yeah.
Well, all right. So, your graduate studies, I think, was at the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment, and you were working on
Yes.
mussels there. Were you working on something similar to this? Was it climate and mussels or something different?
It was a bit different. I mean, this project started while I was there. I actually started initially working on an alligator gar spawning habitat prediction modeling program along with Texas Parks and Wildlife. But we needed aerial imagery of the Lower Guadalupe floodplain, and the entire time that we were sitting around waiting on the water to go down, it never did. It stayed inundated, so we weren't able to get the imagery at that time. So I did what students do who are running out of money. I found a grant
Okay.
for this, and I went into studying freshwater mussels. So I got a grant through the Big Thicket Association and the Big Thicket Preserve, and started studying mussels. It's like, I can't sit around and wait on the water to recede.
That's great.
Little did I know that it was going to come back.
Yeah. Well, the Big Thicket is such a neat place too. So
It is.
that's pretty cool. If y'all listeners, if you haven't visited the Big Thicket, you should put that on your list of places in Texas to see. It's such a cool place.
Absolutely. And it's just the transition and the fact that so much of it is natural. It's just not something that you can find anywhere.
Yeah. So recently you've been working on mussels and climate.
Yes.
What have you been able to find out, and how are these things related?
So they're related, like most organisms, besides humans, reproduction is linked to seasonal cues, and you have thermal limits, thermal thresholds. So your temperature needs to be within optimal range for them to reproduce. So what's happening as our planet is warming up, and as Texas is warming up, and as more people are moving here, and we're diverting water from our rivers, which is something that we have to do, but how is that going to impact the temperature of the water? So are we going to have functionally extinct populations that, hey, yeah, the adults are doing fine, but they're not going to reproduce anymore because they're above that thermal limit? So looking at the climate models, which are large, and then kind of downscaling them to a river shed, and saying, again, at different scenarios, emission scenarios, what's the possibility of how much the water is going to warm up, especially during the time that they would spawn. So your daylight period has to be the same. I mean, your day length and temperature, just like with fish, have to kind of link up to cue in a spawning event.
That day length is called photoperiod.
Photoperiod.
Are they? I mean, I wasn't telling you. I was telling our
Oh,
listeners.
I gotcha. I didn't know if I said that or
I
what.
So that photoperiod, is that what cues them to reproduce, or is it temperature that cues them to reproduce, or a little combination of both, or what?
I'm not. I've been working more on the water temperature. How do we know what the air temperature is going to be? What's that meaning to how do we interpret that into like the middle of the Nueces River? So if our air temperature goes up 1.5 degrees, how is that going to impact our water temperature? Okay. And then you have to account for evaporation, and so models with lots of inputs.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I bet.
yeah.
No, I was thinking more like professor that I had once, Monty Whiting at Stephen F. Austin. He once.
That's where
Do
I
you
did
know
undergrad.
Monty?
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's where I
Yeah.
got my master's and my PhD.
Oh, no way. Yeah.
Yeah, Axum Jacks. Okay, so
Axum.
that's right. So he said that for bird migration, that photoperiod sort of loads the gun, and the temperature will pull the trigger. And so I wonder if there might be something similar, but where it would be so important, where the photoperiod and the temperature link up just right like that for mussels, because if that starts to change, where your photoperiod at a certain time, your water temperature is completely wrong during that photoperiod now, or completely different than it was earlier, that could really change. They could really affect their reproduction. That's where I was going with in my mind there.
Oh, no, I got you. Yeah, and the other thing you have to consider is the same impact on the fish that is their host. So and with fish, that is a big thing: photoperiod and temperature curing spawning. So it could throw it off for the fish, but not the mussel. But if you don't have the fish, you can't have the mussel. So just it's a rabbit hole, I guess. Is that what that's called?
Moving parts.
So many so many things have to come together.
It's just all linked together. So many links. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
You mentioned
Yeah.
a little bit earlier about some of the diversity of mussels you see in these like really rich communities, and then maybe you move, I don't know which direction, but then you see like less diverse communities, maybe a couple species or whatever. Do you have a sense for how climate change is maybe shifting those communities and what impact that might have on local streams? Or like, are there invasive species that are better tolerating these shifts in water temperatures, and it's going to mess
And
things up for our streams and our estuaries and our bays and all that?
the biggest one would inland, it would be zebra mussels. So they're just able to, like invasive exotics do, just kind of overtake and eat all the food, to the point where they have die-offs because their population gets so big, and they have already cleaned everything out. And this is mostly in reservoirs or ponds,
Okay.
but but they just take all the nutrients out of the water, and then the native mussels don't have anything left. And then as far as coming from the other end, when you have salinity increases with increased temperature or subsidence, sea level rise, pushing salt upstream, most freshwater mussels cannot tolerate much salinity at all.
Okay.
So there are a couple that can, and you really can tell where you hit the line. So one is called Glebula rotundata. It's a round pearl shell. So it can be in an estuary, it can be in a headwater lake. It's really like a bass, like a largemouth bass. You can put them in pretty much any water and they're fine for an extended period of time. So you hit a line when that's really all you start finding, or 2 or 3 different species. When upstream from there you found 15, 20
Okay.
in 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden it's just the same handful over and over again. So the problem is, as that kind of the salt wedge increases and goes upstream, travels upstream, your biodiversity starts going down.
Right.
And then a lot of them can't really deal with it. Dissolved oxygen sensitivity is another issue. So the hotter it gets, there's not as much dissolved oxygen, and that starts reducing the number of species that can tolerate that. So you have your ones that can live in, a mucky pond, and then your ones that need to live in a riffle. It's very different tolerances.
So with potential shifts with climate change, should we expect to see changes in the waterways here, or what do you think the fallout would be, or would it not be? It's, those more salinity tolerant ones will push up and then they'll just fill in the spaces. Is that how it's going to work, or it's not clear?
It's well, I mean, I think to an extent, yeah, that's what's going to happen, but you can't really
Know.
predict.
Yeah,
And also, if you get a major storm surge that pushes salt water even up further, then you have to recolonate, and who's going to recolonate? So it's hard to say. There will be life, but will it be exactly like it is now? I really don't think so. I don't know. I can't predict the future, but it's something will live there, but
just
it
who?
will be different.
Right.
Yes. And do we, are they, yeah. So
Some exotic species will be there probably.
Zebra mussels is
zebra mussel. So far, they don't do well with salinity.
Oh,
So
good.
Yay.
seems to be the one thing. But then you have we do have one that's fairly similar, that is a native one that does well with salinity. I don't, again, not something I studied, but they look the same. I came across them one time, like, oh no, it's zebra mussel, and it was not. It was
Some similar.
a false mussel. Yeah,
Nice.
but they look the same. Yeah.
Well, I know I've been learning a lot of new things about mussels and climate change and the link between them. I just wanted to ask you, so it sounds like you've got a lot going on in the mussel world, but you've got a lot of different projects associated with your position. What's on the docket for the future research projects, anything you want to highlight that's coming down the pipeline for you?
Coming down the pipeline. hopefully water continues coming down the pipeline
That
and
would
it's
be good.
clean.
That would be a good one.
Yeah. So future research, though, again, is looking more closely at our rivers and the species that live in them and the thermal tolerance, and then modeling that and seeing an approximation of what can we possibly expect will be here. And gosh, yeah, I don't know, there's so many projects going on right now, it's hard to like narrow it down. And then of course we're working with the back down towards the Southeast Texas area, the Big Thicket area, just continuing to monitor. Unfortunately, they just keep getting pounded with hurricanes and in that area. So every year or two, I go down and do the same survey and see what's changed in that respect. So kind of testing their ability to withstand natural disasters and yeah, continue monitoring that population.
On that note, could you tell us a little bit about the disaster resilience stuff that you are going to be involved in or are currently involved in? I know it's a sidestep from the Mussels focused work, but
Yes, so with the climate center here, we're working with specifically like Texas Sea Grant on coastal resiliency, on coastal communities. People, it's hard to tell someone you have to leave now, a storm is coming, and it tends to be that people wait until the last minute and then all bunched up on a roadway. How can we improve that? How can we improve our forecasting ability and trust within the people that live in a community? Working with industry, like I was saying, the refineries are, they can't leave. They have really scary chemical things going on there that you don't want to get out. So how can you continue to get fresh water into a refinery for cooling water when you are inundated with salt and flood water? Desalinization trailers, all kinds of things like that. So it's a really big project. I'm just now coming in on it. And I'm excited though, because it's another one of those rabbit hole ones where it's just, there's so many parts to it. And then the socioeconomic too. So you have if you build a flood barrier for one place, all that water is going to go to another one. So if you're diverting it from one community, are you going to flood out another one just because it's not as populated or doesn't have as many businesses or something? So all kinds of, this is a bigger project, even like going into social sciences and kind of very broad.
that sounds really cool. I'll be looking forward to what comes out of that project, hopefully here in the coming years.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we like to ask the folks that we've got on our podcast is what advice they might have for newcomers to the field. What sort of expectations, both in job availability and time input, should people who are interested in getting into this field expect? And how resilient do people need to be for working in this field, talking about resilience? And, do they need to have quote unquote thick skins?
Yeah, I think it depends on what role you play in that. I guess if you're going to be the person that goes in and says, this area keeps flooding, you can't get flood insurance again, you would have to have thick skin. So that's part of the resiliency, is you keep rebuilding communities. Should you keep rebuilding these communities in the same spot over and over again, that definitely would require thick skin to be on that end of it. But just like in any field, everything's competitive. So I wouldn't say much more than my previous career. This is my second career. I was a law enforcement park ranger, and that required much thicker skin than than anything I've dealt with in this world has.
The Mussels don't talk back too much, huh?
No, I mean, of course, no, they don't. So, yeah, I've not had to take any to mussel jail yet, so we're good on that one.
Oh gosh.
But as far as job availability with climate sciences, I mean, I would imagine that is a field that's just going to continue to get larger and larger, and the application of climate data into everything. We even work with transportation related to climate and weather change. So it's just endless. Inland waterways and even like automobile travel. So you take your past weather patterns, look at your possible future, and make informed decisions with construction and rebuilding. So yeah, there's a lot of modeling and a lot of coding involved. But if you enjoy that, which I do, because you can put all those different variables in, it's yeah. I believe there will always be jobs in that field. It's just the way the world is going.
Yeah, not lots of applications. I am only recently realizing how often we use climate data and ecological models for, I mean, you do with your
Yeah,
mussels, but also, big game, things that people have, special interest in, they like to hunt or they gather or whatever.
right,
All those data go into these models that we use to predict horn size or antler size, things like
right.
that. So it's really
Yeah,
dynamic. Yeah.
it really is. And what a lot of people don't realize, so like I'm gonna do the RCC flag here. So the Regional Climate Center, we basically host and make that data available. So all those data that are reported on climate and weather, you can say, hey, I'm in Kingsville. What was it like here in, from 1976 to 1980? What were your max mins? What was evapotranspiration? We were able to provide that for you. So
Oh, that's
most of the
great.
time for free, because
Mhm.
it's all taxpayer funded data. So, and
Cool.
it's been quality controlled. By the time we put it back out, everything is good to go. So as a source for that. So if you want to see, so if antlers have changed over the past 30 years, you could look at your climate data over the past 30 years and see what the trend is, if you could figure out the signal.
Cool. That's very cool. I did not know that. I did not know about the RCC and the hosting of all that data. So that's great. A great resource.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We have our own site. So the Southern Regional Climate Center, we have tools on our website. You can click on it, and I just use the extreme tool because they were saying that we've already hit 105, 107 down south, so on Falcon Dam. So
Yeah.
you can pop over and hit our extreme tools and see what's the hottest it's ever been at that station on
Wow.
Falcon Dam. Turns out, yeah, it probably was 105. And on the same day, it was 18 for a low in Dalhart in the Panhandle. So we had over 100-degree spread during that
Wow.
24-hour period in Texas, which is crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a big place.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, and it
It is.
spans so many different ecosystems and climates too. It's
Right.
wow, but that's what makes
Yeah.
it so
Yeah.
special.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, one of our favorite questions is for a biology blunder,
Uh-huh.
as working like we do out in the field in the environment, things just sometimes go awry and you end up with a funny story. Do you have a biology blunder that you could share with our listeners?
A listener appropriate story. Yes. Yeah. I do. Okay. So going back to the big thicket being a very biodiverse area, you have large green reptiles called alligators there. They're pretty common. I mean,
Yeah.
through most of East Texas and going into South Texas. So a lot of the students that I took out on the last trip were there were some from Minnesota, there were some from the Panhandle of Texas. They were didn't know what they were getting into. I mean, they had an idea. So we were on our second or third day out in the field, and we hadn't seen any alligators. I showed them what the tracks look like. It's like, this is an alligator track. Just be aware. So we're all in water at least up to our shoulders, and diving down and doing our sampling. And I look over, and there's a pretty decent sized alligator swimming across the bayou from where we were. And it was pointing itself in the other direction. But I mean, I would guess it was probably between 8 and 10 feet. It was an adult full size alligator. So they all, oh my God, oh, we're gonna die. I'm like, no, it doesn't care about you. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's not gonna bother you. And I look over and one of them runs out of the water, grabs his cell phone, and goes over there and tries to take pictures of it because I said it's not gonna bother you.
No.
Like, no. No. So
That
yeah.
does not mean approach.
That just does not mean grab your cell phone and go take videos of it, please. So that was a pretty funny one.
That's probably a big shocker. You're diving, you're not realizing, I'm from the
Yeah.
north. We don't have to think about alligators ever. With
No.
the exception of the one they found in, what was it, New York, Central Park? That was a
Someone
random.
released it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Generally, we don't have to worry about it. So, like, I think I'd be a little spooked. I come up from, diving and it's an alligator.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know the protocol for this.
Just don't bother it.
Right. Don't pet it.
Don't grab your cell phone and try to get as close as you can to it. Yeah. So yeah. I had to change my verbiage on alligators. It's like, okay, if you don't mess with it, it will not mess with you. Not just it's not going to bother you. Yeah,
right.
That was a good one.
That's funny. It makes you wonder sometimes how many young people have died. I don't know what that noise is in the background, but
it might be here.
Oh, okay. But how many young people we've lost because they just had to video something with
yes. Even falling off a cliff or a building, just getting too close to the edge. Yeah.
So you don't want, you just don't need an alligator selfie. That's just
no, you don't.
All there is to it.
It's to be your last one. No.
Might be a great photo, but don't do it.
You won't get to see all the likes.
Right. That's right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today about mussels or climate or anything else?
I guess if you need climate information, we're always here. But since I do work a lot with water, we have to do better on that as a society, and we have to reduce the amount and increase our efficiency of water use, because Texas is getting more people and less water all the time. So it's just something, it's better to start working on that now than wait until it's an absolute crisis. Right. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times people say to me, what do you mean we don't run out of water? Water gets recycled, it goes into the environment. We don't run out of water. What are you talking about? So could you
sure
explain?
Yeah. So going back to the climate side, so maybe your annual rainfall total isn't going to change that much, but the intensity and timing of it are going to change. So you could still get 40 inches of rain, but you're not going to get it a little bit every day. You might get 20 inches dumped in one extreme event, and then 5 in another extreme event, and then little. So you don't have the infiltration into the ground and recharging the aquifers like you would. You have more runoff, which is more solid pollution going into the suspended solids going into your waterways. So it's again, it's you can't predict the future, but that is looking like the trend. It's more extreme events and not like coastal, just going in the summer. You usually get showers every day or so. I mean, some little something, but that might not happen. Instead, you just get these large, intense rain events. So yes, all the same amount is there, but the delivery is different.
Okay.
And if the ground is particularly dry, is it less likely to absorb that rain coming down in these more intense events?
That's a hard question too. So no, it would, if the ground is dry, it would eventually absorb more. So there's depending on your soil type too. If you have hard, dry clay, it's not going to necessarily soak in, but in sand, it would filter through pretty quickly. But then you get to a point where you're fully saturated, and then you have massive runoff. So you're not getting that water. It's just going into the Gulf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The water was there, but you weren't able to use it because it just runs off.
Right. Yeah.
Now, a lot of water use in Texas is irrigation.
Yes.
And, farmers, they've got to make those decisions for themselves. But what can just individuals who aren't farmers, what can we do to help conserve water?
I mean, simple things like people always say, don't run the tap while you're brushing your teeth. That's a good one. If you're going to, personally, I don't like grassy, perfectly green yards. That's one of the biggest consumers of water. It's just people watering their pretty manicured lawn. Use native plants, kind of more xeriscaping. And if you use the plants that are meant to grow where you live, they're pretty adapted to it, and you don't have to water as much. If you like to garden, use more efficient like drip irrigation systems that you can set on a timer. And there are all kinds of apps now that are being developed that will take your weather data and your humidity and tell you how much you need to water. And this is more for the agriculture side, but really increasing the efficiency of use. So you're still ending with the same product, but you're using every science possible to increase your efficiency of use. But yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is use native plants. And if you're going to water, don't do it in the middle of the day when it's just evaporating. Do it in the morning or evening once it cools off. And the evening, then you have your whole overnight for it to soak in and not evaporate off.
That's when I water my garden. I try to garden. I'm not very good at it, but
same.
I try to garden. And so I'll turn it on in the evening thinking that, so all night long, those plants can take up that water and to try to be prepared for the brutal hell that they're going to suffer in July and August when we get to that point. Where I'm just trying to keep them alive.
That's how last year was. So,
hang on, guys.
Yeah. Hopefully this year will be better, but I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your information. It's been great. I learned so much about mussels, especially the little guys.
The little parasitic guys.
They were parasites. So interesting.
You can Google some of, just to look at the larva. I mean, the female mussel, they have some crazy looking. I mean, some look like it looks exactly like a minnow. So I think the Mussels of Missouri has some good YouTubes on that.
Okay, we'll have to look for that. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you all. Yeah.
Remember, don't feed the wildlife, y'all.
Don't feed the wildlife. Don't eat it either if it's a mussel.
That's really good advice. Thank you.
Thank y'all.